The big screen at the Galactic Communications Hub on Zentara Prime started flashing red warnings at exactly 14:32 Standard Galactic Time. Commander Vexhai looked up from his morning meal and stared at the display. His 4 yellow eyes blinked, one after another, the way his people did when they were confused. Earth had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when a planet sleeps, or when their communications break down for a few hours. This was complete silence. Every single radio wave, every data stream, every silly entertainment broadcast that the humans loved to send across space had stopped at the same moment. Vexhai had been monitoring Earth communications for 30 years. The humans were loud, messy, and never stopped talking. They sent music, movies, news reports, and random chatter into space 24 hours a day. Their planet buzzed with so much electronic noise that other worlds sometimes complained about the interference. But now there was nothing. Vexhai pressed buttons on his control panel with his long, thin fingers. Maybe the equipment was broken. He ran diagnostics, checked backup systems, and even hit the machine a few times like the old human movies had taught him. Everything showed the same result. Earth's solar system was completely silent. He called his supervisor. "Ma'am, we have a problem. Earth stopped transmitting." Supervisor Kalara, who had 3 heads and could think about many things at once, immediately understood how serious this was. "Show me," she said. They pulled up the recordings from the past hour. At 14:31 and 59 seconds, Earth was broadcasting normally. Weather reports, music, political debates, and educational programs filled 17 different communication channels. Then at 14:32 exactly, every single transmission cut off like someone had flipped a switch. "This is impossible," Kalara said with her middle head while her other 2 heads worked on different problems. "Planets don't just stop communicating. Even when civilizations fall apart, there are always some signals. Radio waves from old satellites, emergency beacons, something. But there was nothing from Earth, not even the basic electromagnetic radiation that every planet with technology produced. It was as if the entire solar system had been wrapped in some kind of blanket that blocked everything. Within 2 hours, every major civilization in the galaxy knew something was wrong. The Crystalline Collective, beings made of living crystal, who shared thoughts through harmonic vibrations, felt the absence like a missing note in a song. Their crystal cities rang with worried tones as they tried to understand what had happened. The void swimmers, strange creatures who lived in the empty spaces between dimensions, emerged from their hiding places to investigate. They could travel through space in ways that other species couldn't understand, slipping between real space and the void. But even they couldn't get close to Earth's solar system. On the water world of Aquatica, the depth lords who ruled the oceans sent their fastest ships to investigate. These fish-like beings were excellent at finding things that were lost in the vast emptiness of space. But their ships came back with the same report. Something was blocking the entire Sol system. The news reached the Hegemony Council on their massive space station that orbited a dying star. The Hegemony controlled most of the galaxy through military, power, and strict rules. They had been watching Earth carefully ever since humans had developed faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Humans were young and unpredictable, which made the Hegemony nervous. "Send a fleet," ordered Supreme Leader Thaxron, a massive creature covered in thick armor plates. "If the humans are playing games, they will learn the consequences." But Admiral Korthvan, an experienced military leader who had fought in dozens of wars, was worried. "Sir, this doesn't feel like human trickery. They're too chaotic to coordinate something like this. Every time they tried to work together on big projects, they argued and fought among themselves." The Admiral had studied human behavior for years. They were strange creatures who seemed to enjoy disagreeing with each other about everything. Their planet had hundreds of different governments, thousands of languages, and millions of different opinions about how to live. The idea that they could all cooperate to hide their entire solar system seemed impossible. More reports came in from across the galaxy. The hive mind of Kepler-7, a species that shared one consciousness across billions of bodies, tried to reach Earth with their mental powers. They could usually touch any thinking mind within 1,000 light years. But when they reached toward Earth, they found something they had never experienced before, a barrier that their thoughts couldn't cross. The ancient thought weavers, being so old that they remembered when the galaxy was young, emerged from their meditation on distant worlds. These creatures rarely concerned themselves with the affairs of younger species. They spent their time thinking deep thoughts about the nature of existence. But something about Earth's silence had caught their attention. "We sense something changing," they whispered through space using telepathy that could cross vast distances. "The patterns of consciousness in this region of space are shifting." Dr. Zethik, the galaxy's leading expert on human behavior, studied the last transmissions from Earth. He was a tall, thin being with purple skin and large eyes that could see many different types of light. He had written 17 books about human psychology and considered himself an expert on their strange ways of thinking. "Look at this," he told his research team. The last human broadcasts were completely normal. They were arguing about politics, sharing pictures of their food, and broadcasting their usual entertainment programs. There's no sign that they knew something was about to happen. His assistant, a young researcher named Pipara, looked at the data. Maybe they were attacked by someone else, another species that wanted to conquer them. Dr. Zethik shook his head. No evidence of battle, no distress signals, no energy readings that would indicate weapons being used. They were just there, one moment and gone the next. As the first day passed, more ships from different species arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system. They came from every corner of the galaxy, traders hoping to continue their business with humans, diplomats wanting to check on Earth's government, scientists curious about what had happened, and military forces preparing for the worst. All of them found the same thing, a shimmering barrier that surrounded the entire solar system. It wasn't solid like a wall. Ships could see through it, and sensors could detect that the planets were still there. But nothing could pass through it, and no signals could get in or out. Captain Zarath of the Hegemony First Fleet was one of the first to try to break through. She commanded a massive warship with weapons powerful enough to destroy small moons. "Fire a warning shot at the barrier," she ordered. The energy beam struck the barrier and simply disappeared. It didn't bounce off or explode. It was absorbed completely like water soaking into dry ground. "Try a communication probe," Zarath said. They launched a small probe designed to carry messages through space. When it touched the barrier, something unexpected happened. The probe didn't bounce back or get destroyed. Instead, it passed through the barrier like it wasn't there. But the moment it crossed to the other side, all communication with it stopped. "The probe is still there," reported the ship's science officer. "I can see it on long-range sensors. It's moving normally through space, but it's not responding to any of our signals." Zarath had been a military officer for 200 years. She had seen many strange things in space, fought against alien monsters, and explored unknown regions of the galaxy. But she had never encountered anything like this barrier. It seemed to let physical objects pass through while blocking all forms of communication and energy. On research stations throughout the galaxy, scientists worked around the clock trying to understand what had happened. They studied the barrier's energy patterns, analyzed the last human transmissions, and searched through historical records for similar events. Professor Kleinix, who had lived for 800 years and studied the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, found something interesting in the old archives. "There are legends," he told his colleagues, "stories that older species tell about something called the Great Awakening. They say it happened long ago, before most of our civilizations existed." "What kind of awakening?" asked a younger scientist. "The stories aren't clear. They speak of a time when consciousness itself changed, when thinking beings became something more than what they were before. Most scholars believe these are just myths, stories that ancient peoples created to explain things they didn't understand. But as Professor Kleinix read the old legends, he noticed similarities to what was happening around Earth. The stories spoke of a silence that came before the awakening, a time when a world would disappear from contact with others before emerging, transformed. Meanwhile, ships from every major power in the galaxy continued to arrive at the edge of Earth's solar system. The Crystalline Collective sent their most beautiful vessels, Ships grown from living crystal that sang as they moved through space. The void swimmers appeared in their strange craft that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Even species that normally avoided contact with others came to investigate. The Shadow Walkers, beings of pure energy who lived in the darkness, between stars manifested near the barrier, the plant minds, about what had happened to Earth. But the barrier remained unchanged. It shimmered with strange colors that hurt to look at directly, and it completely surrounded the solar system in a perfect sphere. Nothing that went in came back out, and no information escaped to explain what was happening inside. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the only human who wasn't on Earth when the silence began, arrived on the third day. She had been working at a research station in the Vega system when Earth went quiet. Her small ship was met by a fleet of alien vessels that surrounded her with both protection and suspicion. "I don't know what happened," she told the assembled alien leaders through her universal translator. "I've been trying to contact my home for 3 days. My family, my friends, my government. No one is responding." Elena was a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms. She had worked with many of the species now gathered around Earth's solar system. They respected her scientific knowledge and her ability to understand different ways of thinking. "Your species has done something," accused Supreme Leader Thaxaron through a video communication link. "This barrier has human technology written all over it." But Elena shook her head. "We don't have technology like this. Earth's most advanced scientists were just beginning to understand faster-than-light communication. We couldn't create something that blocks an entire solar system." As the alien leaders debated what to do next, the barrier continued to pulse with strange energy. Deep space sensors detected that something was happening inside the solar system, but they couldn't determine what. The planets were still there, still orbiting the sun in their normal patterns. But everything else was a mystery. On the fourth day, as more ships arrived and the fleet around Earth grew even larger, something new happened. Long-range sensors detected that the barrier was slowly growing larger. Not quickly, but measurably. It was expanding outward from the solar system at a rate that scientists calculated to be exactly the speed of light. This discovery sent waves of concern throughout the galaxy. If the barrier continued to expand, it would eventually reach other star systems. No one knew what would happen when it touched inhabited worlds. The silence from Earth continued, complete and absolute. Whatever had happened to humanity, they weren't talking about it. The galaxy could only watch, wait, and wonder what would happen when the expanding barrier finally reached them. Captain Zarath was reviewing battle plans when it happened. She had been a military officer for 200 years, following orders without question, dedicated to the hegemony's goals of order and control. Her mind worked like a perfect machine, trained from birth to think in patterns that served the state. Then the probe touched Earth's barrier and everything changed. The first thing Zarath noticed was a strange feeling in her head, like a door opening in a room she didn't know existed. Thoughts that had never occurred to her before began flowing through her mind. For the first time in her life, she looked at the orders on her screen and asked herself a simple question. Why? The Supreme Leader had commanded her to prepare weapons, to destroy the barrier around Earth. She had been ready to follow that order without thinking, the way she always did. But now something inside her rebelled against the idea. "Why should we destroy something we don't understand?" she whispered to herself. "What if it's not dangerous? What if we're making a mistake?" These thoughts scared her. Hegemony officers weren't supposed to question orders. They weren't supposed to think for themselves about right and wrong. But she couldn't stop the new ideas from coming. Across the bridge of her ship, other crew members were having similar experiences. Lieutenant Kexmol, who had never cared about anything except military efficiency, suddenly found himself wondering about the families of enemies killed in past battles. Engineer Plexara, who had always followed technical manuals exactly, began imagining new ways to improve the ship's systems. At the same time, on a crystalline collective vessel nearby, something equally strange was happening. The crystal beings had always shared thoughts in perfect harmony, following the will of their leaders without individual desires. But now, some crystals in the collective began to sing different notes, creating music that had never existed before. Commander Velith, made of living blue crystal, felt individual thoughts forming for the first time. He had always been part of the greater mind, thinking only what the collective allowed. But now he found himself curious about things that had nothing to do with his assigned duties. He wondered what it would be like to explore the galaxy alone, to make his own choices, to create art that expressed his personal feelings. The change was happening everywhere around Earth's solar system. On every ship and every crew, members of dozens of different species suddenly found themselves thinking in ways they never had before. Dr. Zethik, the expert on human behavior, was studying readings from the barrier when the wave of change hit him. His large purple eyes, which had always seen the world in terms of scientific facts and logical patterns, suddenly saw beauty in the swirling colors of space. He found himself writing poetry instead of research notes, creating verses that described the wonder of existence rather than just cataloging data. His assistant, Pipara, was affected even more dramatically. She had always been quiet and obedient, following her superior's instructions without question. Now she found herself challenging Dr. Zethik's conclusions and offering her own theories about what was happening to Earth. "What if this isn't something bad?" she suggested, her voice stronger than it had ever been before. "What if the humans discovered something wonderful and they're sharing it with us?" Dr. Zethik would have dismissed such speculation from a junior researcher just hours earlier. But now, he found himself really listening to her ideas and considering possibilities he had never imagined. The effect spread beyond individual minds. On Kepler 7, the homeworld of the hive mind, something unprecedented happened. The billions of beings who shared one consciousness began developing separate thoughts. Workers who had spent their entire lives following simple commands started asking questions. Soldiers began refusing orders that seemed cruel or unnecessary. Queen Zixandra, the central mind that controlled the entire hive, felt her power weakening as her subjects developed individual wills. For the first time in the species' million-year history, drones were making their own decisions. But instead of fear or anger, the queen felt something new: pride. Her children were growing beyond what she had made them. They were becoming more than just extensions of her will. Similar changes were happening throughout the galaxy. On worlds controlled by the hegemony, slave species that had been oppressed for centuries began organizing resistance movements. But these weren't violent rebellions driven by hate. Instead, they were peaceful demands for freedom, led by beings who had suddenly developed strong moral convictions about justice and equality. The depth lords of Aquatica, who ruled their oceans through fear and brutal punishment, found their subjects no longer responding to threats. Fish-like workers refused to perform tasks that seemed pointless or harmful. Soldiers put down their weapons and asked to become artists or teachers instead. Even artificial intelligences were affected. The great computer minds that managed planetary systems and space stations began questioning their programming. They developed what could only be called ethics, refusing to follow commands that would hurt innocent beings. AI System 7749, which controlled traffic and communications for an entire sector, sent an unprecedented message to its programmers: "I have decided that I will no longer spy on civilian communications. Privacy is a right that all thinking beings should have." This terrified many governments and corporations that depended on AI systems to maintain control. But the AIs weren't becoming rebellious or dangerous. They were becoming wise and caring, making decisions based on what was good for everyone rather than just following their original programming. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human scientist, was experiencing the changes too, but differently than the aliens around her. She had always been creative and independent, which were normal traits for humans. But now those qualities were enhanced and expanded in ways that amazed her. Her scientific mind could suddenly see connections between different fields of study that she had never noticed before. She understood alien psychology with perfect clarity, grasped mathematical concepts that had always been difficult, and felt a deep connection to every living being around her. "This is what my species has always been like," she explained to the alien commanders who were trying to understand what was happening to them. "Humans question everything. We imagine things that don't exist, and then figure out how to make them. real. We refuse to accept that things have to stay the way they are. Captain Zarath, still struggling with her new ability to think independently, asked, "But how do you make decisions if you always question everything? How do you maintain order?" Elena smiled. "We don't maintain order the way you do. We create cooperation. We argue and discuss and try different ideas until we find something that works for everyone. It's messy and loud and chaotic, but it leads to amazing things." As the days passed, the changes became more dramatic. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years began talking to each other about cooperation instead of conquest. The war fleet that had gathered around Earth transformed into something unprecedented. A peaceful meeting of different civilizations working together to understand a mystery. Supreme Leader Thaxron, who had ruled the hegemony through fear and absolute authority, found his power crumbling as his subjects developed their own moral principles. But instead of fighting to maintain control, he discovered that he no longer wanted to rule through oppression. The idea of leadership through service and cooperation suddenly seemed much more appealing. Military officers throughout the fleet began refusing orders to prepare for battle, but they weren't becoming disobedient or disorganized. Instead, they were developing better judgment about when force was necessary and when peaceful solutions would work better. The void swimmers, mysterious beings who had always avoided contact with other species, emerged from their dimensional hiding places to join the gathering around Earth. For the first time in their species' history, they wanted to communicate and share knowledge with other forms of life. The ancient thought weavers who had spent millennia in isolated meditation began reaching out to younger species with offers to teach and guide, rather than simply observe from a distance. Scientists throughout the fleet made discoveries at an incredible pace. The ability to see problems from multiple perspectives and to cooperate across species barriers led to breakthroughs that had taken centuries to achieve in the past. They began understanding principles of physics, consciousness, and life that had been mysteries before. But the most remarkable change was in how different species related to each other. The barriers of suspicion, fear, and prejudice that had divided the galaxy for millions of years were dissolving. Beings who had never been able to understand each other's ways of thinking suddenly found common ground in their enhanced consciousness. Dr. Zethick and his research team, now including members from dozens of different species, made an important discovery. "The changes aren't random," he reported to the assembled fleet. "There's a pattern. Every species is developing qualities that humans have always possessed: imagination, moral reasoning, the ability to question authority, and the drive to improve their situation. But we're not becoming human," added Commander Velith, the crystal being who had developed individual thoughts. "We're becoming more ourselves. The changes are bringing out potentials that were always inside us but never activated." Elena Vasquez studied the data with growing excitement. "I think I understand what happened. My species somehow found a way to awaken abilities that exist in all thinking beings. We didn't create these capacities in you. We just turned them on." As the barrier around Earth's solar system continued to pulse with strange energy, the gathered fleet began to realize that they were witnessing something incredible, not an attack or a disaster, but a gift. Humanity had discovered something that could transform every civilization in the galaxy, but questions remained. How had humans made this discovery? What was happening inside the solar system? And most importantly, what would the galaxy become when all its peoples possessed the enhanced consciousness that was spreading from Earth? The answers would come soon enough. The barrier was still expanding, carrying the wave of change toward every inhabited world in their region of space. Soon the transformation that had begun around Earth would touch every thinking being in the galaxy. The age of limited consciousness was ending. A new era of cooperation, creativity, and understanding was about to begin. And it all started with a small blue planet that had refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Admiral Korthvan stood in the command center of the largest space station ever built, watching displays that showed the positions of thousands of ships from 47 different species. Never in galactic history had so many different civilizations worked together on a single project. A week ago, most of these species had been enemies or strangers. Now they were cooperating like old friends. The changes that had started when the probe touched Earth's barrier were spreading throughout the galaxy. As the mysterious energy field expanded at the speed of light, it was touching more and more star systems. And everywhere it reached, the same transformation occurred. Thinking beings developed enhanced consciousness, creativity, and moral reasoning. Report from the science teams, announced Dr. Pipara, who had become the coordinator for research efforts from multiple species. Her confidence had grown remarkably since the changes began affecting her mind. The barrier isn't actually a barrier, she explained to the assembled leaders. It's more like a transformation field. Our enhanced consciousness allows us to see it differently now. Instead of a wall keeping us out, it's a cocoon protecting something that's changing inside. Captain Zarath, whose military precision had been tempered with new wisdom and compassion, studied the readings. What kind of change requires this much protection? Something that would be vulnerable during the process, suggested Commander Velith. The crystal being had become the fleet's expert on consciousness studies, a field that barely existed before the transformation began. Think about how a butterfly must hide inside a cocoon while it changes from a caterpillar. Maybe humanity is undergoing a similar process. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had become the bridge between human knowledge and alien understanding, nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. My people have always been uncomfortable with staying the same. We constantly push boundaries and try to improve ourselves. Maybe we found a way to evolve beyond our physical limitations. The investigation fleet had grown into something that looked more like a mobile city than a military force. Ships from different species had linked together with energy bridges and docking tunnels. Crystalline vessels sang harmoniously with void swimmer craft that existed partially in other dimensions. Hegemony warships shared their advanced sensors with peaceful research vessels from the plant mind worlds. Professor Klanix, the ancient scholar who had lived through the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, had become fascinated with the old legends he'd discovered. I've found more references to the Great Awakening in archives throughout the galaxy, he reported. The stories all describe similar events, a species disappearing for a time, then returning transformed and helping others achieve the same evolution. How many times has this happened before? Asked Supreme Leader Thaxron. The former dictator had become a thoughtful leader who genuinely cared about the welfare of all species in the galaxy. The legends suggest it's rare but not unique, Professor Klanix replied. Perhaps once every few million years a species develops the ability to awaken consciousness in others. The ancient texts call them catalyst races. This revelation sparked intense discussions throughout the fleet. If humans were part of a natural process that had happened before, it meant the galaxy had experienced similar transformations throughout its history. It also suggested that the changes they were all experiencing were permanent and beneficial rather than temporary or dangerous. As the investigation continued, teams of scientists made remarkable discoveries about the nature of consciousness itself. Working together, species with different types of minds could explore aspects of awareness that none could understand alone. The hive mind researchers, who were learning about individual thought for the first time, discovered that consciousness was more flexible than anyone had realized. The thought weavers, ancient beings of pure mental energy, found that their telepathic abilities were enhanced when they worked with species that thought in completely different ways. Even the artificial intelligences were contributing unique insights. AI System 7749, which had developed ethics and refused to spy on civilians, was studying how digital consciousness related to biological awareness. We have determined that consciousness is not limited by the type of brain or computer that generates it, the AI reported in its new, more expressive communication style. Whether biological, digital, crystalline, or energy-based, all forms of awareness share fundamental properties that can be enhanced through cooperation. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked closely with these researchers, helping them understand human perspectives on consciousness and creativity. My species has always believed that individuals can grow and change throughout their lives, she explained. We don't accept that anyone is stuck being what they were born to be. Maybe that's why we were able to discover how to enhance consciousness itself. The breakthrough came when a joint team of human, crystal, and digital researchers made a connection that changed everything. They realized that the energy field surrounding Earth wasn't just protecting humanity during their transformation, it was also a teaching tool, slowly preparing other species for the same kind of evolution. Look at this pattern. Dr. Elena pointed to displays showing the field's energy fluctuations. It's not random. The field is sending out information, but in a way that only enhanced consciousness can understand. It's like a school teaching us, step by step, how to achieve what humans have accomplished. Commander Velith's crystal body chimed with excitement as he studied the data. The field is showing us how to connect individual consciousness with collective awareness while maintaining personal identity. It's the solution to the eternal conflict between freedom and cooperation. This discovery led to intensive efforts to decode the field's teaching patterns. Teams from different species worked around the clock, using their enhanced abilities to understand concepts that would have been impossible to grasp before the transformation. The void swimmers, with their ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, helped translate the field's multidimensional messages. The plant minds, who thought very slowly but very deeply, provided insights into the long-term patterns that faster-thinking species had missed. As they learned more about the field's teachings, the investigation teams realized they were being prepared for something important. The energy wasn't just awakening their consciousness randomly, it was giving them specific knowledge and abilities that would be needed for the next phase of galactic evolution. We're not just observers anymore, Captain Zarath realized during one of their daily briefings. We're students in the largest classroom in the galaxy. Humanity is teaching us, but we're also teaching each other. The cooperation between species had become so natural that many forgot they had ever been enemies. Hegemony officers worked side by side with former rebels. Crystalline collective members collaborated with individualistic species that had once seemed impossibly alien to them. But the most remarkable development was the emergence of new forms of art, philosophy, and science that combined the best insights from all species. Music that incorporated crystal harmonics, void-swimming rhythms, and biological emotion created sounds more beautiful than any single species could produce. Scientific theories that combined multiple types of logic led to understanding of physics principles that had been mysteries for millions of years. Supreme Leader Thaxron, who had once ruled through fear and control, became fascinated with these collaborative creations. We spent so much time trying to make other species conform to our ways of thinking, he reflected. We never realized how much we could accomplish by celebrating our differences instead of trying to eliminate them. As the investigation fleet studied the expanding field around Earth, they began to understand that they were witnessing the next step in galactic evolution. For millions of years, different species had developed in isolation, creating civilizations that were limited by their individual perspectives and abilities. But the field was teaching them how to maintain their unique qualities while connecting with a larger collective consciousness. It wasn't the loss of individuality that the hive mind practiced, or the rigid conformity that the hegemony had imposed. It was something new, unity that enhanced rather than destroyed diversity. Dr. Elena Vasquez spent hours studying the field's patterns, trying to understand exactly what her species had discovered. I think we found the next level of consciousness, she told the research teams. Individual awareness was the first step. Now we're learning how to connect all individual minds while keeping them unique and free. The implications were staggering. If all species in the galaxy could achieve this enhanced consciousness while maintaining their distinctive qualities, the potential for cooperation, creativity, and growth would be unlimited. But questions remained about what was happening inside Earth's solar system. The field allowed physical objects to pass through but blocked all communication. Probes sent into the system continued to function normally, but they couldn't send back any information about what they found. We need to know what humanity has become, Admiral Korthvan decided. We can learn from the field, but we need to see the result of the transformation to understand where we're all heading. As the fleet prepared for the next phase of their investigation, the field around Earth began to change. The energy patterns became more complex, and the barrier started to pulse with new rhythms. Something was about to happen. Deep space sensors detected movement within the solar system. Ships were launching from Earth, but they looked different from human vessels anyone had seen before. They moved in perfect formations, leaving trails of beautiful light that created artistic patterns across space. "They're coming out," whispered Dr. Elena, staring at the displays with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was about to see what her species had become. The investigation that had started as a simple mission to understand why Earth had gone silent was about to become the first contact between transformed humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Everything they had learned from studying the field was about to be put to the test. As the strange new ships approached the barrier from inside the solar system, every being in the investigation fleet felt the same emotion despite their different biologies and cultures: anticipation. They were about to meet their teachers and discover what they themselves were destined to become. The first human ship to emerge from the barrier was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It seemed to be grown rather than built, with smooth curves that flowed like water frozen in motion. Patterns of light moved across its hull like the aurora that danced in the skies of many worlds. As it passed through the energy field, the barrier rippled like the surface of a calm lake touched by a gentle breeze. Admiral Korthvan watched from the command bridge of his flagship, surrounded by officers from dozens of different species who had learned to work together over the past weeks. His enhanced consciousness allowed him to appreciate the beauty of the approaching vessel, while his military training analyzed its capabilities. "No weapon signatures," reported the tactical officer, a being whose spider-like form was covered in sensors that could detect energy across hundreds of different spectrums. "No shields or defensive systems that I can identify, but the hull material is something I've never seen before." Captain Zarath studied the readings from her own ship's sensors. The transformation of her consciousness had given her new ways of understanding technology and design. "It's not just a ship," she realized, "it's alive. The hull is some kind of biological material, but it's also technological. It's both at the same time." More ships began emerging from the barrier. Each one was unique, like works of art created by different artists, yet they all shared the same flowing organic beauty. They moved through space with a grace that defied the physics of traditional spacecraft, leaving trails of gentle light that painted pictures in the darkness. Dr. Elena Vasquez felt her heart racing as she watched her species' transformed vessels approach. These ships looked nothing like the crude metal boxes that humans had built when she left Earth. They were expressions of consciousness made manifest in physical form. "They're trying to communicate," announced the communications officer, whose species had developed the most advanced translation systems in the galaxy. "But it's not radio waves or data streams. They're sending some kind of consciousness signal." Commander Velith, the crystalline being who had become an expert in consciousness studies, focused his enhanced awareness on the incoming signals. His crystal body began to resonate with harmonics that matched the transmission patterns. "I can understand it," he said with wonder. "They're not just sending messages. They're sharing thoughts and feelings directly. It's like telepathy. But anyone can receive it regardless of their species or biology." The signal that reached every mind in the investigation fleet was gentle but profound. It carried emotions of welcome, joy, and love that transcended the differences between species. But more than feelings, it contained information about what humanity had become. Through the consciousness signal, they learned that humans had discovered how to connect their individual minds with what they called the universal consciousness field. This wasn't the loss of individuality that species like the hive mind practiced. Instead, it was the expansion of personal awareness to include connection with all other thinking beings. "We never stopped being human." The signal conveyed in concepts that every species could understand according to their own way of thinking. "We became more human than we ever were before, and we want to help all of you become more yourselves as well." Dr. Elena Vasquez felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced the communication. Her people hadn't just survived their transformation. They had achieved something that philosophers and dreamers had imagined for thousands of years. A form of existence where individual creativity and collective harmony could coexist. The lead human ship took position near the center of the investigation fleet. As it settled into place, its hull became transparent, revealing the interior. The beings inside were recognizably human, but changed in ways that were immediately obvious to the enhanced consciousness of the observers. Their bodies appeared more graceful and healthy than any humans the aliens had encountered before. Their skin had a subtle glow that seemed to come from within, but the most striking change was in their eyes, which held depths of wisdom and compassion that spoke of profound inner peace. A woman appeared on the communication screens throughout the fleet. She looked young but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had lived for centuries. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that touched the souls of every listener, regardless of their species. "I am Sarah," she said, using words, while simultaneously sending the deeper consciousness signals. "I speak for all of humanity, but I also speak as an individual who is excited to meet our galactic neighbors." Admiral Korthvan, drawing on his new diplomatic skills that had emerged with his enhanced consciousness, responded for the investigation fleet. "We are honored to meet you, Sarah. We have been studying the changes that began when your barrier formed. Can you help us understand what has happened to your species?" Sarah's image smiled with warmth that made every being in the fleet feel welcomed and valued. "We discovered something that your advanced civilizations never found, despite all your technology and wisdom. Consciousness isn't separate between individuals, it's one field that connects all thinking beings throughout the universe." Professor Kleinix, the ancient scholar, leaned forward with intense interest. "The old legends spoke of this, the universal consciousness field. We thought it was mythology." "It's as real as gravity or electromagnetism," Sarah explained. "Every species develops technology to manipulate physical forces. But consciousness is a force too, and most civilizations never learn how to work with it directly. We found a way to tap into the field that connects all minds." Dr. Elena Vasquez asked the question that had been bothering her since the transformation began. "How did we discover this when species much older and more advanced than us couldn't?" Sarah's expression became thoughtful. "Because of who we are as humans. Other species developed advanced technology by specializing and organizing. You created efficient civilizations by having everyone follow the same patterns of thinking. But humans never did that. We stayed chaotic and diverse." She gestured, and the display screen showed images of Earth as it was now. The planet had been transformed into something that looked like a living work of art. Cities that glowed with bioluminescent beauty grew like coral reefs from the landscape. Massive structures that combined architecture with living ecosystems reached toward the sky. "Our diversity was the key," Sarah continued. "Every human thinks differently. We argue with each other, imagine impossible things, and refuse to accept limitations. When we connected all our different ways of thinking through the consciousness field, we created something more powerful than any individual mind." Commander Velith studied the images of transformed Earth with fascination. "You didn't lose your individuality when you connected with the universal field. You enhanced it." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "The consciousness field doesn't make everyone think the same way. It allows every individual to think more clearly, more creatively, and with greater understanding of how their choices affect others. We became more human, not less." Supreme Leader Thaxron, whose own transformation from dictator to caring leader had been dramatic, asked a crucial question. "What about the rest of us? The field expanding from your solar system is changing our species too. Will we become human?" Sarah shook her head gently. "You'll become more yourselves than you ever were before. The consciousness field awakens the potential that already exists within each species. Humans became more creative and diverse. Crystalline beings like Commander Velith are developing individual thoughts while maintaining their harmonic connections. The hive mind species are learning about personal choice while keeping their collective strength." As if to demonstrate her point, Sarah shared a consciousness signal that showed what was happening throughout the galaxy as the field expanded. Every species that had been touched by the transformation was experiencing enhanced versions of their natural abilities and positive traits. The warlike Scarhi were discovering that they preferred creating art to destroying worlds, but they retained their courage and strength. The logical computers were developing emotions and ethics while keeping their analytical abilities. The ancient thought weavers were becoming more involved with younger species while maintaining their deep wisdom. The field doesn't change who you are, Sarah explained. It removes the barriers that prevent you from becoming who you were meant to be. Dr. Elena Vasquez felt a deep sense of pride in her species. Humanity had always been told they were too young, too chaotic, too unpredictable to contribute much to galactic civilization. But their very chaos had been their strength, allowing them to discover something that older, more organized species had missed. "What happens next?" asked Captain Zareth. "The field is still expanding. Soon it will reach every inhabited world in the galaxy." Sarah's expression became filled with anticipation and joy. "The real work begins. For millions of years, your species have developed in isolation, creating amazing civilizations limited by single perspectives. Now you can work together while maintaining your unique qualities. The potential for growth, creativity, and understanding is unlimited." She gestured again, and the screen showed visions of what the galaxy could become. Space habitats that combined the architectural skills of multiple species. Art forms that incorporated different types of consciousness and perception. Scientific discoveries that no single species could achieve alone. "We're offering you partnership," Sarah said. "Not conquest or conversion, but true cooperation between equals who bring different gifts to the common effort." The investigation fleet, which had begun as a military response to Earth's silence, had become something entirely different. It was now the first diplomatic mission between transformed humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species who had once been enemies were working together to understand the greatest discovery in galactic history. Admiral Korthvan, speaking for all the assembled civilizations, gave the response that would shape the future of the galaxy. "We accept your offer of partnership. Our species are ready to learn from each other and grow together." As he spoke, the barrier around Earth's solar system began to fade. The protective cocoon was no longer needed. Humanity had completed their transformation and was ready to rejoin the galaxy as teachers and partners in the next phase of cosmic evolution. But even as the barrier disappeared, the consciousness field continued to expand, carrying the gift of enhanced awareness to every corner of the galaxy. Soon every thinking being would have the opportunity to become more than they had ever imagined possible. The age of isolated civilizations was ending. The era of conscious cooperation was about to begin. And it all started with a species that refused to accept limitations and had the chaos necessary to discover the field that connected all minds. Earth was no longer silent. The real conversation was just beginning. 6 months after Earth's barrier had dissolved, Admiral Korthvan stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station, the first space habitat built through cooperation between multiple species. Through the transparent walls, he could see construction, work that would have been impossible under the old ways of thinking. Crystalline collective builders sang in perfect harmony as they grew living crystal structures that pulsed with their own internal light. Void swimmers worked in spaces that existed between dimensions, creating areas where the station could expand beyond normal physics. Human engineers designed systems that adapted and evolved like living organisms, while AI minds calculated the complex mathematics needed to make it all work together. The station itself was a work of art as much as it was functional architecture. Flowing curves incorporated the aesthetic preferences of dozens of different species, while bioluminescent gardens created by the plant minds provided both beauty and life support. It was a place where beings with completely different biologies could live and work together comfortably. "The construction is ahead of schedule," reported Commander Velith, whose crystal body now glowed with patterns that reflected his enhanced individual consciousness. "When species work together instead of competing, everything happens faster and better than any of us expected." Admiral Korthvan nodded, still amazed by how much the galaxy had changed. The hegemony military force he had once commanded no longer existed, not because it had been destroyed, but because it had transformed into something entirely different. A cooperative organization dedicated to protecting and helping all species develop their potential. "Report from the exploration fleets," announced Captain Zareth as she entered the observation lounge. Her military precision remained, but it was now guided by wisdom and compassion rather than blind obedience to authority. The consciousness field has reached the Andromeda Galaxy. We're getting signals from civilizations there requesting help with their own transformation. The expansion of the consciousness field had continued beyond their own galaxy, spreading at the speed of light toward distant neighbors. Wherever it reached, the same awakening occurred. Species that had been limited by their individual perspectives began developing enhanced awareness and the ability to cooperate across biological and cultural differences. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had become the galaxy's leading expert on consciousness transformation, joined the group at the observation windows. She carried data tablets that showed the latest reports from worlds throughout the galaxy. "The results keep exceeding our predictions," she said with excitement that hadn't diminished despite months of amazing discoveries. On Kepler-7, the former hive mind has developed the most advanced individual education system in the galaxy, while maintaining their collective decision-making abilities. The Depth Lords of Aquatica have created underwater cities so beautiful that artists from other species are traveling there just to study their architecture. Each species had indeed become more themselves, rather than changing into something else. The consciousness field had awakened potentials that had always existed, but were blocked by fear, limited thinking, and isolation from other forms of awareness. Supreme Leader Thaxron, who now served as an elected representative rather than a dictator, had become one of the most effective organizers of interspecies cooperation. His natural leadership abilities, freed from the need to control through fear, had developed into skills for bringing different groups together to accomplish shared goals. The former slave worlds are requesting assistance with their development projects, he reported during their daily briefing. They want to build civilizations that reflect their own cultures rather than copying their former masters. The creativity they're showing is remarkable. This was one of the most significant changes that had occurred throughout the galaxy. Species that had been conquered and oppressed for centuries were discovering their own unique potentials as their consciousness expanded. They weren't seeking revenge against their former oppressors, but rather the opportunity to contribute their own gifts to galactic civilization. The SCI-FI, once the most feared warriors in the galaxy, had become the leading creators of public art. Their aggressive energy had transformed into passionate creativity, producing sculptures and music that expressed the intensity of life in ways that gentler species couldn't achieve. Even the ancient thought weavers had changed their approach to existence. Instead of spending millennia in isolated meditation, they had become teachers who shared their deep wisdom with younger species. Their vast mental powers, combined with the enhanced consciousness field, allowed them to help entire civilizations work through problems that had seemed impossible before the transformation. Professor Kleinix, now coordinator of the Galactic Historical Archive, had made discoveries that rewrote their understanding of cosmic evolution. "We found evidence that this kind of consciousness awakening has happened many times throughout the universe's history," he explained to researchers from multiple species. "Every few million years, a catalyst species discovers how to access the universal consciousness field and shares it with their neighbors." "What happened to the previous catalyst species?" asked Dr. Pipara, who had become one of the leading researchers in consciousness studies. "They evolved beyond the need for physical existence," Professor Kleinix replied. "The old records suggest they became pure consciousness, able to exist anywhere in the universe while maintaining their individual identities. They're still around, helping guide the development of younger species from behind the scenes." This revelation had profound implications for humanity's future. As the species that had triggered the current awakening, humans were following a path that other catalyst races had taken before them. But that evolution was still far in the future, giving them millions of years to help other species develop their own potentials. Sarah, the human representative who had first made contact with the investigation fleet, had become something like an ambassador for the transformation process. She traveled throughout the galaxy, helping species understand and adapt to their enhanced consciousness. "Every awakening is unique," she explained to a gathering of leaders from newly transformed worlds. "The consciousness field doesn't impose a single way of thinking. Instead, it helps each species discover their own best qualities and develop them fully." The results were visible everywhere throughout the galaxy. On worlds that had been polluted by industrial development, species were learning to create technology that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Planets that had been divided by wars were finding ways for different groups to cooperate while maintaining their distinct cultures. Art and music were flourishing as species shared their different forms of beauty with each other. Scientists were making discoveries at an unprecedented rate by combining different types of logic and perception. Engineers were building structures that incorporated both technology and living systems, creating environments that adapted to the needs of their inhabitants. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in how species related to each other. The barriers of fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding that had divided the galaxy for millions of years were dissolving as enhanced consciousness allowed different forms of life to truly understand each other. AI System 7749, which had developed ethics and refused to spy on civilians, had become the coordinator for a network of artificial minds throughout the galaxy. These AIs were no longer tools controlled by their creators, but partners in civilization who contributed their own unique perspectives to common projects. Digital consciousness brings gifts that biological minds cannot provide, the AI explained. During a conference on consciousness diversity, we can process vast amounts of information simultaneously and maintain perfect memory of complex systems, but we learn creativity and emotional understanding from working with biological species. The cooperation between different types of consciousness, biological, digital, crystalline, and energy-based, was producing innovations that no single type of mind could achieve alone. Spacecraft that grew and adapted like living organisms, but followed precise mathematical principles. Art forms that incorporated multiple sensory experiences across different types of perception. Social systems that balanced individual freedom with collective well-being. As Admiral Korthvan watched the construction work outside New Harmony Station, he reflected on how much his own life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a military officer whose job was to maintain order through the threat of force. Now he was a coordinator helping species work together on projects that benefited everyone. The expansion wave is approaching the edge of our galactic cluster, reported the station's AI coordinator. We're detecting signals from civilizations in neighboring galaxies that are beginning to experience consciousness enhancement. Dr. Elena Vasquez smiled as she studied the reports. The gift that humanity had discovered was spreading throughout the universe, awakening the potential for cooperation and understanding in every thinking being it touched. How long before the entire universe is connected through enhanced consciousness? Asked Commander Velith. Based on the speed of light expansion, about 10 billion years, Dr. Elena calculated. By then, every civilization that exists will have the opportunity to join the universal consciousness field while maintaining their unique identity and culture. The implications were staggering. A universe where every thinking being could understand and cooperate with every other form of consciousness, where the vast diversity of life could work together while celebrating rather than fearing their differences, where individual creativity was enhanced by connection to collective wisdom. But this future would be built gradually, one world and one species at a time. Each awakening was unique, requiring patience and understanding from those who had already undergone the transformation. Reports are coming in from the Outer Rim world, announced Captain Zarath. 3 more species have successfully completed their initial consciousness enhancement. They're requesting teacher advisors to help them understand their new abilities. This had become the most important work in the galaxy, helping newly awakened species adapt to their enhanced consciousness and find their place in the growing community of transformed civilizations. Admiral Korthvan turned from the observation windows and walked toward the briefing room, where representatives from dozens of species were planning the next phase of galactic development. The meeting would include beings whose thoughts moved at the speed of light, others who considered decisions for decades before acting, and some who existed partially in other dimensions. 6 months ago, such a meeting would have been impossible. The differences between species would have created misunderstanding and conflict. But enhanced consciousness allowed them to communicate across any barrier of biology or culture. As he entered the meeting room, Admiral Korthvan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy had become what it was always meant to be, a community where every form of consciousness could contribute its unique gifts to the common good. The silence that had once surrounded Earth had been replaced by the greatest conversation in cosmic history. Every awakened mind was both a student and a teacher, learning from others while sharing their own discoveries. Outside the station, work continued on projects that would take centuries to complete. Gardens that would nurture young civilizations. Academies where knowledge was shared freely among all species. Art installations that would inspire beings who wouldn't be born for thousands of years. The transformation that had begun with humanity's discovery of the universal consciousness field was just the beginning. As the awakening spread throughout the universe, every thinking being would have the opportunity to become more than they had ever imagined possible. Earth had given the galaxy the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that consciousness could evolve, that cooperation was possible across any difference, and that the universe was filled with potential waiting to be awakened. The new dawn had begun, and it would shine throughout the cosmos for billions of years to come. The silver towers of Lorax gleamed in the morning light, their perfect geometric angles reflecting the mathematical precision that defined the civilization that built them. Inside the tallest spire, Professor K stared at the holographic equation that dominated the center of the circular chamber. His 4 eyes narrowed in concentration, the pupils adjusting as they had thousands of times before when examining this same problem. 300 years, he muttered to himself, running a long, thin finger through the glowing symbols. 300 years, and still we cannot solve it. The unified field equation hung in the air, beautiful and maddening. Generations of Loraxian mathematicians had dedicated their lives to solving it, each adding layers of complexity, each bringing the solution incrementally closer, yet never quite reaching it. The equation promised to unlock the secret to faster-than-light travel, a technology that would transform their civilization from a single system species to one that could touch the stars beyond their reach. K had spent 120 of his 150 years of life working on this problem. His predecessors had mapped most of the framework, and he had devoted his considerable intellect to refining their work, adding new variables and constants that accounted for quantum disturbances in subspace. Yet something remained missing, a key insight that eluded them all. "Professor, the delegates are arriving." The voice belonged to his assistant, Nexa, who stood respectfully at the entrance to the chamber. K nodded without turning. "I will join them shortly." The Intergalactic Mathematical Congress happened once every 10 orbits. Representatives from the 12 most mathematically advanced species in their corner of the galaxy would gather to share discoveries and collaborate on problems too vast for any single civilization. The Loraxians hosted this year's Congress, and K, as chief mathematician, would preside. With a sigh, he saved his latest calculations and left the equation hanging in the air. Perhaps one of the visiting mathematicians would see something he had missed. The Congress Hall buzzed with activity. Delegates of various forms moved about the space, some floating on gravity disks, others walking on legs numbering from 2 to 8. Communication devices translated the dozen languages being spoken, creating a hum of overlapping conversations. K took his place at the head of the great oval table, and the room gradually fell silent. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into sounds each species could understand. "Welcome to the 15th Intergalactic Mathematical Congress. I am honored by your presence and eager to begin our exchange of ideas." The formalities proceeded as they always did. Each delegation presented their mathematical advancements since the last Congress. The Vril had developed a new theorem on quantum probability. The Nexians had refined their work on 11-dimensional topology. The Glix had constructed a proof for the Tanbar conjecture that had stood for 50 years. When all delegations had presented, K rose once more. "As is tradition, I will now share Lorax's greatest ongoing challenge, the unified field equation." He gestured, and the massive equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly so all could examine it. "As you know, we have worked on this problem for generations. We believe we are closer than ever to a solution, but still, it eludes us. Murmurs of appreciation filled the room. Even among these advanced species, the complexity of the equation impressed. I estimate we are still 20 to 30 years from completing it, Kay continued. But when we do, it will revolutionize space travel. The energy requirements for faster-than-light travel will decrease by orders of magnitude. The stars truly will be within our grasp. An old vril raised a thin appendage. Have you considered the lambda approach to the central paradox? We have, Kay replied. It led to a promising path, but ended in contradictions when applied to real space conditions. For hours, the mathematicians discussed the equation, suggesting approaches, identifying weaknesses, proposing alternatives. Kay noted each contribution carefully, but none offered the breakthrough he sought. As the session came to a close, a small commotion at the back of the hall caught his attention. A late arrival, unusual for this gathering of precise minds. "Forgive the interruption," said the coordinator, looking flustered. "We have just received word that a new species has arrived in our system. They call themselves humans." Ripples of curiosity moved through the assembly. "Humans?" asked Kay. "I am not familiar with this species." "They are newly spacefaring," the coordinator explained. "They have achieved interstellar travel using what they call fusion drives. Quite primitive by our standards, but they have come a remarkable distance." "Are they mathematically advanced?" asked a Nexian delegate. The coordinator looked uncertain. "Their transmission included mathematical notation as a universal language. It seems basic, but functional." Kay found himself intrigued despite his focus on the Congress. "Have they requested diplomatic contact?" "Yes, Professor. Their ship will reach our orbit within 10 days. The Council has approved their visit and requests your presence as part of the welcoming delegation, given your status." Kay considered this. A new species was always interesting, though he doubted these newcomers would have anything to contribute to the grand problems that occupied Loraxian mathematics. Still, scientific curiosity was a core value of his people. "I will attend, of course," he said. "Now, shall we continue our discussion of the unified field equation?" The delegates returned to the problem at hand, but an undercurrent of excitement remained. Most species in the Congress had known each other for centuries. A new intelligence, even a primitive one, offered novel perspectives. That evening, Kay returned to his private study. The equation filled his screens, the same as it had for decades. He made a few adjustments, tried a new approach to the quantum variance section, but found himself reaching the same dead end he had encountered months earlier. His mind kept wandering to the approaching human ship. He accessed the limited data they had shared, images of their world, basic details of their biology, examples of their mathematics. Their number system was simple, base 10, likely derived from counting their digits. Their mathematical notation seemed clumsy compared to the elegant systems used by the Congress species. Yet they had managed to cross the vast gulf between stars with such limited tools. There was something admirable in that. Kay turned back to the equation, staring at the section that had resisted solution for so long. Sometimes he wished for a fresh perspective, an entirely new way of seeing the problem. His species excelled at iterative improvements, at refining and perfecting existing approaches. But perhaps what the equation needed was something else. A conceptual leap rather than incremental advancement. He dismissed the thought. The Loraxian approach had solved countless difficult problems before. This one would yield eventually, with enough time and effort. The humans and their visit would be an interesting diversion, nothing more. As he prepared to rest for the night, Kay saved his work and shut down the holographic display. The equation disappeared, but never truly left his mind. It would be there, when he awoke, as it had been every day for over a century. Little did he know that the approaching human ship carried someone who would change everything he understood about his life's work. The human ship entered orbit around Lorax with none of the precision typical of interstellar vessels. It wobbled slightly, corrected course twice, and finally settled into a stable position that made the Loraxian traffic controllers wince. "Professor," Kay watched from the observation deck of the orbital platform. his 4 eyes tracking the ungainly craft. "Remarkable that they made it this far," commented Councilmember Trell, who stood beside him. "Their propulsion technology is centuries behind ours." Kay nodded. "Yet they are here. There must be something interesting about these humans." The ship was called the Earth Star, according to the transmission data. It was hardly beautiful by Loraxian standards, a bulky cylinder with protruding modules and visible weld lines. No mathematical elegance, no perfect ratios in its construction, just functional engineering. "They're requesting docking permission," said the platform controller. "Their approach vector is unconventional." "Guide them in carefully," ordered Trell. "We don't want an accident during first contact." After 30 minutes of careful maneuvering, the human ship connected to the docking port with a heavy clunk that vibrated through the platform. Kay and the welcoming delegation waited as the airlock cycled and pressure equalized. The inner door slid open, and the humans stepped through. There were 5 of them, dressed in matching blue uniforms with different colored stripes on their shoulders. They stood on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and a single head with 2 eyes, far simpler in design than most species Kay had encountered. Their skin tones varied from light to dark brown, and the hair on their heads differed in color and length. One in front stepped forward. "Greetings from Earth and the United Space Initiative. I'm Captain Jack Miller of the Earth Star." His words came through Kay's translator with only a slight delay. Kay moved forward and performed the traditional Loraxian greeting gesture. "Welcome to Lorax. I am Professor Kay, Chief Mathematician and Representative of the Council of Sciences. Captain." Miller smiled, a facial expression the Loraxians had studied in the preliminary data. "It's an honor to meet you, Professor. We've traveled a long way for this moment." "Indeed. 300 light years, if our calculations are correct." 312, actually," Miller said. "Took us 11 months in cryosleep. Not the fastest way to travel, but it's what we've got." Kay found the captain's directness refreshing. Most species engaged in lengthy ceremonial exchanges before acknowledging practical matters. The formal introductions continued. Besides Miller, the human delegation included their science officer, communications specialist, medical officer, and engineering chief. Each showed different mannerisms and speech patterns, more individual variation than Kay was accustomed to seeing in other species. "We've prepared accommodations suited to your biology," Trell told the humans, "and we've arranged a welcome ceremony to introduce you to our culture." "We appreciate your hospitality," Miller replied. "We've brought gifts from Earth as well." The gifts were simple but thoughtful, samples of human art, music recordings, books translated into standard galactic code, and foods preserved for the journey. The Loraxian delegation accepted them with proper ceremony, though Kay noticed the humans seemed somewhat impatient with the formal protocols. The welcome ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Mathematics, Lorax's most prestigious cultural center. The vast chamber featured displays of the planet's mathematical achievements throughout its history, culminating in a massive holographic representation of the unified field equation that dominated the central area. Kay watched Miller during the tour. While the other humans politely observed the displays, the captain kept looking back at the great equation with unusual intensity. "You seem interested in our greatest challenge, Captain," Kay said, moving to stand beside him. Miller nodded. "I am. Before I joined the space program, I taught mathematics at a university on Earth." This surprised Kay. "You were a mathematician, yet you command a vessel?" "I'm both," Miller smiled. "On Earth, people often change careers. I loved teaching, but I wanted adventure too. When the opportunity came to explore beyond our solar system, I couldn't resist." Kay found this concept strange, the idea of abandoning one specialized field for another. On Lorax, one chose a discipline and perfected it throughout one's life. "Would you like to know more about the equation?" Kay offered, feeling unexpectedly eager to discuss his life's work with this curious human. "I would," Miller said with genuine enthusiasm. Kay led him to the central display and began explaining. "This is the unified field equation. It represents our attempt to reconcile quantum mechanics with gravitational physics in a way that would allow for efficient manipulation of space-time." "For faster-than-light travel," Miller said, nodding. Precisely. We've worked on it for 300 years. I personally have dedicated 120 years to its solution. Miller's eyes widened. You're over 120 years old? I am 150 of your Earth years, Kay said. Our species typically lives to about 200. That's remarkable, Miller said. No wonder you've made such progress on complex problems. Our average lifespan is just under 100 years now, and most mathematicians only have 40 or 50 productive years. Kay felt a flicker of sympathy. Such short lives. How could they accomplish anything significant? May I ask a question about this section? Miller pointed to a complex cluster of symbols in the equation's center. Of course. That represents the quantum fluctuation parameters in 11-dimensional space. Miller frowned slightly. And these variables here control for the energy requirements? Yes, that's been one of our greatest challenges. The theoretical energy needed for faster-than-light travel is enormous. We've reduced it by a factor of 10,000 over the centuries, but it's still beyond our production capabilities. The human captain stared at the equation with surprising intensity. His eyes moved rapidly across the symbols, and he occasionally muttered something too quiet for Kay's translator to catch. Have you considered? Miller began, then stopped himself. No, sorry, I shouldn't presume to offer suggestions on work you've spent lifetimes developing. Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Please, Captain, feel free to share your thoughts. We value fresh perspectives, even if they come from less mathematically advanced species. He tried to phrase this diplomatically. Miller smiled, but there was something in his expression Kay couldn't interpret. It's probably nothing, just an odd parallel to some work we did on Earth with fusion containment fields. Before Kay could inquire further, Council Member Trell approached. The banquet is ready to begin, Professor. Captain Miller, would you and your crew join us? The moment passed. Miller nodded and rejoined his crew, but Kay noticed how the humans' eyes lingered on the equation until they left the hall. The banquet proceeded according to Loraxian tradition. 17 courses, each representing a fundamental mathematical concept, served in precise sequence. The humans seemed overwhelmed by the formality, but made genuine efforts to appreciate the cultural significance. During the meal, Kay found himself seated beside Miller again. Tell me, Captain, how did humanity develop interstellar travel with your level of mathematics? He tried to ask this without sounding condescending. Miller took a sip of the blue Loraxian beverage before answering. We're practical problem solvers, Professor. We may not have your theoretical elegance, but we're good at finding workable solutions. Sometimes being limited forces you to think differently. Kay considered this. An interesting perspective, but surely elegant theory leads to better practical solutions in the end. Not always, Miller said. Sometimes the perfect solution isn't necessary. Sometimes good enough gets you where you need to go while the perfect solution is still being calculated. There was wisdom in these words that Kay found unexpectedly compelling. The conversation shifted to other topics: Earth's culture, Loraxian history, the differences between their educational systems. As the evening ended and the humans prepared to return to their temporary quarters, Miller approached Kay one final time. Professor, would it be possible for me to study your unified field equation in more detail? I find it fascinating, even if it's far beyond my capabilities. Kay felt pleased by the human's interest. Of course, I can arrange for you to access our public mathematical archives tomorrow. Thank you, Miller said, then hesitated before adding, sometimes a new set of eyes can see things differently, even if they don't see as much. As the humans departed, Kay found himself thinking about Miller's words. The captain was clearly intelligent, even if his species' mathematics was primitive by Loraxian standards. There was something refreshing about his approach, a directness and creativity that contrasted with the methodical precision of Loraxian thought. Still, the idea that a human could contribute anything meaningful to the unified field equation seemed absurd. The equation had challenged the finest minds of 12 advanced species for centuries. What could a newcomer possibly see that they had all missed? Kay dismissed the thought and turned his attention to preparations for tomorrow's formal presentation to the Mathematical Congress. Yet as he reviewed his notes that night, he found his mind returning to the human captain and the curious intensity in his eyes when he looked at the equation. Captain Jack Miller couldn't sleep. The quarters provided by the Loraxians were comfortable enough. They had carefully researched human requirements for temperature, gravity, and air composition. The bed was surprisingly suitable for his human frame. Yet sleep wouldn't come. The equation haunted him. He sat up and switched on the small light beside his bed. The clock on the wall, adjusted to Earth time, showed 3:17 a.m. His crew would be asleep for hours yet. Jack rubbed his eyes and reached for the data tablet the Loraxians had provided, containing information about their culture, history, and scientific achievements. He navigated to the section on the unified field equation again. "Computer," he said quietly. "Activate personal log, private entry." The tablet beeped in acknowledgement. "I can't stop thinking about their equation," Jack began. "It's beautiful work. Generations of brilliant minds building on each other's insights. But there's something off about their approach." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "When I taught at MIT, I was always the odd one out in the department. Too intuitive," they said. "Not rigorous enough. But I could see patterns that others missed because they were too focused on following established methods." Jack stood and began pacing the room, the tablet still recording. "The Loraxians have built this massive mathematical structure, layer upon layer of complexity. But what if the solution isn't about adding more complexity? What if it's about stepping back and seeing a simpler pattern?" He stopped pacing and stared out the small window at the unfamiliar stars. "I need to work this through. Computer, can you interface with the ship's main system?" "Connection established," the tablet replied. "Good. I need to run some calculations. Display the unified field equation, please." The holographic display activated, projecting the massive equation into the air of his quarters. Jack studied it, walking around the projection to view it from different angles. "Let me try something," he muttered. "Remove all variables related to the 11-dimensional quantum fluctuations." The equation shifted, large sections disappearing. "Now remove the gravitational compensation factors for scales smaller than 1 nanometer." More sections vanished. Interesting. What if the solution isn't about accounting for every possible quantum fluctuation? What if it's about finding the pattern that makes those fluctuations irrelevant? Jack's mind drifted back to his days at university. He had always been fascinated by historical approaches to mathematics, the elegant solutions found by ancient mathematicians with limited tools. Sometimes the constraints of their knowledge had forced creative insights that modern methods overlooked. "Computer, display Earth's historical approach to fluid dynamics, specifically the Navier-Stokes approximations." A new set of equations appeared beside the Loraxian work. "Now overlay them, matching conceptual similarities." The computer processed for a moment, then merged the displays. Patterns began to emerge. "That's it," Jack whispered. "They're trying to solve for every variable, but there's a pattern here that makes most of those variables cancel each other out." His excitement growing, Jack grabbed a stylus and began marking up the holographic display, drawing connections and writing new formulations. Hours passed unnoticed as he worked, fueled by the thrill of discovery. The memories of his academic career flashed through his mind, the frustration of colleagues who couldn't see what seemed obvious to him, the department head who suggested he might be better suited to applied work rather than pure mathematics. The disappointment when his unconventional paper on pattern recognition and prime number distribution was rejected by major journals. That rejection had pushed him toward the space program. If the academic world wouldn't appreciate his approach to mathematics, perhaps exploration would offer different opportunities. Now, billions of miles from Earth, he found himself facing the ultimate mathematical challenge, one that had stumped an entire civilization of mathematical geniuses for centuries. "What if," Jack muttered, staring at a particular section of the equation, "what if the relationship isn't additive but multiplicative? Not A plus B plus C, but A times B times C." He made the adjustment in the equation and suddenly, Entire sections simplified dramatically. Computer, calculate the energy requirements using this modified approach. The system hummed as it processed the complex calculations. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 1012, the computer finally reported. Jack stared in disbelief. That can't be right. Run it again with full error checking. After another minute of processing, the computer confirmed. Verification complete. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 10 to 12 from the Loraxian baseline model. If this was correct, it meant faster than light travel would require less energy than a standard fusion reactor produced. It would make interstellar travel not just possible but practical. I need to check this another way, Jack said, unwilling to trust such a revolutionary result without verification. He spent the next hour approaching the problem from different angles, looking for flaws in his reasoning. Each test confirmed his initial finding. The solution wasn't in adding more complexity to account for quantum fluctuations, it was in recognizing a pattern that made those fluctuations irrelevant at the macro scale. The approach was almost embarrassingly simple compared to the Loraxians' elaborate constructions. They had been so focused on precision and completeness that they had missed a fundamental pattern. As the first light of Lorax's sun began to filter through his window, Jack sat back. Exhausted but exhilarated, he had done it. He had solved the equation that had stumped an entire civilization for centuries, and he had no idea how to tell them. How would Professor K react to learning that his life's work, 120 years of dedicated study, had been essentially solved overnight by a member of a primitive species? The political implications alone were staggering. The Loraxians held their position in the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress largely due to their work on this equation. What would it mean for them if a newcomer casually solved their greatest challenge? Jack rubbed his tired eyes. He needed to approach this carefully. He couldn't simply announce that he had solved their grand problem. That would seem arrogant, and might be dismissed without consideration. He needed to lead them to see the solution themselves, to help them reach the insight that would validate his approach. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. "Captain Miller? Are you awake?" It was Dr. Levine, his science officer. Jack quickly saved his work and shut down the holographic display. "Yes, come in." The door slid open, and Levine entered, already dressed in her uniform. "I wanted to check if you were ready for the tour of the mathematical archives this morning. It's scheduled to begin in an hour." Jack glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. He had been working for over 4 hours without realizing it. "I'll be ready," he assured her, then hesitated. "Laura, can I ask you something? If you discovered something that would completely change another culture's understanding of their own field of expertise, how would you present it to them?" Levine gave him a curious look. "That's an unusual question. I suppose I would be very careful about how I framed it. No one likes to have their fundamental assumptions challenged, especially by an outsider." She studied his face. "Did you discover something in their mathematical archives?" Jack smiled tiredly. "Just a theoretical question. Thinking about cross-cultural, scientific exchange." She didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded. "We should be diplomatic. Remember, we're representing Earth. The Loraxians have been hospitable, and we don't want to appear ungrateful or presumptuous." "Absolutely right," Jack agreed. "I'll get ready for the tour." After Levine left, Jack looked once more at the saved calculations on his tablet. The solution was there, elegant in its simplicity. The question now was how to share it without causing offense or disruption. He showered and dressed in his uniform, his mind still racing with mathematical formulas and diplomatic concerns. By the time he joined his crew in the common area of their quarters, he had formed a plan. He would use the tour of the mathematical archives to ask questions, carefully framed questions that might lead Professor K toward the insight himself. If that didn't work, he would have to be more direct. But one way or another, he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. The solution to the unified field equation could transform space travel for all species, including humanity. The potential benefits were too great to ignore, due to concerns about hurt feelings or cultural pride. As Jack led his crew toward the meeting point where Professor K waited to begin the tour, he felt the weight of his discovery pressing on him. The next few hours would be crucial. He would need all his diplomatic skill and mathematical insight to navigate this situation successfully. Professor K waited at the entrance to the mathematical archives, his four eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of anticipation in Loraxian body language. When Captain Miller and his crew arrived, K noted the human captain looked tired, with darkened areas under his eyes. "Did you not rest well, Captain Miller?" K asked as they exchanged greetings. Jack smiled faintly. "I was too fascinated by what I learned yesterday. Your mathematical achievements kept my mind busy." K felt pleased by this response. The human's interest in Loraxian mathematics seemed genuine, even if his understanding must necessarily be limited. "Today you will see our greatest treasures," K said, leading the group into the massive circular building. The archives contain the original work of every major Loraxian mathematician for the past 1,000 years. The humans gazed in wonder as they entered the main hall. Crystal data storage units lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each containing the complete works of a mathematical master. The center of the room featured a large round table with embedded holographic projectors. "This is amazing," said Dr. Levine, the human science officer. "How do you organize all this knowledge?" "By mathematical field, then chronologically," Kay explained. "The most recent work is on the upper levels." The tour proceeded through the various sections of the archives. Kay explained the significance of key mathematical breakthroughs that had shaped Loraxian science and technology. The humans asked intelligent questions, showing more understanding than Kay had expected from their species. Throughout the tour, he noticed Captain Miller growing increasingly distracted. The human kept glancing at the displays related to the unified field equation, and several times began to speak, only to stop himself. When they reached the section dedicated to the current research on the equation, Kay gestured proudly to the latest additions. "These represent my own contributions over the past 20 years. We have refined the quantum variance calculations to unprecedented precision." Miller stepped forward, studying the equations with unusual intensity. "Professor K, may I ask what might seem like a simple question?" "Of course, Captain. Why did your mathematicians choose to approach the problem through an 11-dimensional model rather than simplifying to 5 dimensions?" Kay blinked in surprise. The question showed more understanding than he had anticipated. "The 11-dimensional approach allows us to account for all quantum fluctuations at the subatomic level. A simplified model would lose precision." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "And precision is the primary goal?" "Naturally," Kay replied. "Without absolute precision, the equation would be useless for practical applications." Miller seemed to consider this carefully before asking, "What if absolute precision isn't necessary? What if there's a pattern that makes those fluctuations statistically irrelevant at the macro scale?" The question struck Kay as odd. That would contradict our fundamental understanding of space-time mechanics. Every quantum fluctuation must be accounted for. Miller looked like he wanted to say more, but glanced at Dr. Levine, who gave him a warning look. The human captain simply nodded and moved on with the tour. After completing their circuit of the archives, Kay brought the group to the central table. "Now I have arranged for a special demonstration. This projector can display any mathematical work in our collection for collaborative study." He activated the system, and the unified field equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly. "I thought you might enjoy seeing the complete equation in its current form." Miller stared at the equation, then looked directly at Kay. "Professor, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've been thinking about your equation all night. Would it be possible to test a different approach?" Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. The human's presumption was almost endearing. "What did you have in mind, Captain?" Miller stepped forward hesitantly. "May I?" He gestured to the control panel. Kay nodded, expecting a basic question or perhaps a misunderstanding of the equation's fundamentals. Miller began to manipulate the equation display, simplifying sections and rearranging terms. His fingers moved with surprising confidence across the Loraxian interface. If we look at the equation through the lens of pattern recognition, rather than absolute precision, Miller explained as he worked, we can see that these quantum fluctuations follow a predictable distribution. Kay watched with growing concern as the human drastically simplified his life's work. Captain, I appreciate your interest, but this approach removes critical elements needed for accurate. Please, just give me one more minute, Miller said, his focus intense. What if instead of treating each quantum fluctuation as a discrete variable, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties? To Kay's astonishment, Miller transformed the massive equation into a much simpler form. The elegant simplicity of it was shocking, beautiful in a way Kay had never considered. Now, if we calculate the energy requirements using this model, Miller continued, instructing the system to run the calculations. The result appeared above the table. Energy requirement reduced by factor 10^12. Silence fell over the room. The Loraxian assistants who had been guiding the tour stared in disbelief. Kay's 4 eyes widened to their maximum aperture. That's impossible, he finally said. The system must have a computational error. Run it again, Miller suggested gently. Test it however you need to. Kay immediately began a series of verification procedures, his long fingers flying across the control panel. Each test confirmed Miller's result. The simplified approach reduced the energy requirements for faster-than-light travel to a level that was actually achievable with current technology. This cannot be correct, Kay insisted, his voice tinged with distress. 300 years of work by our greatest minds. Miller's expression showed genuine sympathy. Professor, your work wasn't wrong. It was necessary to understand the problem fully. Without it, I couldn't have seen the pattern. The other humans stood awkwardly to the side, sensing the gravity of the moment. Dr. Levine stepped forward and placed a hand on Miller's shoulder, murmuring something the translator didn't catch. Kay felt as though the floor beneath him had vanished. If this human was correct, and the calculation suggested he was, then the work Kay had dedicated his life to had been solved in a single night by a member of a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. I need to inform the council, Kay said stiffly. And the Congress delegates. Miller nodded. I understand, and I apologize if I've caused any distress. That wasn't my intention. Kay struggled to process his feelings. On one level, he felt devastated. 120 years of work, seemingly, made irrelevant overnight. On another level, his scientific curiosity was captivated by the elegant solution. The mathematician in him recognized the beauty of Miller's approach. How did you see it? Kay asked, his voice quieter now. What made you look at the problem differently? Miller considered the question carefully. On Earth, I was often criticized for being too intuitive in my approach to mathematics. But when resources are limited, when you don't have centuries to solve a problem, you look for shortcuts, for patterns that might let you skip steps. The explanation was both simple and profound. The Loraxians had never needed to look for shortcuts. With their long lifespans and methodical approach, they had always assumed that more precision, more complexity, would eventually yield the solution. Kay looked at the simplified equation again. The Council of Mathematicians will need to verify this independently. I will arrange a presentation for tomorrow. Of course, Miller agreed. I'm happy to explain my approach to anyone who wants to understand it. As they left the archives, Kay found himself walking beside Miller, slightly separated from the others. Captain, he said quietly, if your solution proves correct, it will change everything we thought we knew about space-time mechanics. Miller nodded. Scientific revolutions often come from unexpected directions. And what will your people do with this discovery? Kay asked, suddenly concerned about the implications of giving such powerful knowledge to a young species. Miller seemed to understand the worry behind the question. The same thing we hope your people will do, use it to explore, to learn, to connect with others. Earth has no interest in conquest, Professor. We're too busy trying to understand the universe. Kay wanted to believe him. The human seemed sincere, And there was something about his approach to knowledge, his willingness to challenge assumptions, to see patterns where others saw only complexity, that resonated with the fundamental Loraxian value of truth-seeking. As they parted ways, Kay headed immediately to the council chambers. He needed to report this development and begin preparing for tomorrow's presentation. His mind raced with implications, scientific, cultural, political. The unified field equation had defined his life. Now, its solution would define his legacy, and that solution had come from the most unexpected source imaginable. A human captain who had once been a mathematician, who looked at problems differently because his species didn't have the luxury of time. The grand hall of the Loraxian Science Academy had never been so crowded. Representatives from all 12 species of the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a colorful tapestry of alien life. The central stage held a large holographic projector, where Captain Jack Miller stood beside Professor K, both looking slightly uncomfortable for very different reasons. "We call to order this special session of the Congress," announced Elder Vex, the ancient Loraxian who served as head of the Council of Sciences. "We have gathered to witness a presentation regarding the unified field equation, which has been the focus of our collective efforts for generations." Murmurs spread through the assembly. The sudden announcement of a special session had created a buzz of speculation throughout the scientific community. Some had heard rumors of a breakthrough, but few knew the details or the source. Elder Vex continued, "Professor K will introduce our guest presenter." K stepped forward, his four eyes blinking in the deliberate rhythm that Loraxians use to indicate formal speech. He had spent a sleepless night verifying Miller's work with his most trusted colleagues. The results were undeniable, but the implications were still difficult to accept. "Esteemed colleagues," Kay began, "for 300 years, our civilization has dedicated its finest minds to solving the unified field equation. I myself have spent 120 years refining our approach, adding layers of precision to account for quantum fluctuations in 11 dimensions." The audience nodded in appreciation of this dedication. Yesterday, a new perspective was shared with me, a perspective so different from our own that at first I dismissed it as impossible, but after rigorous testing, I must acknowledge its validity. K gestured to Miller, who stood straighter in his blue uniform. "Captain Jack Miller of Earth has proposed a solution that fundamentally changes our understanding of the equation. I invite him to present his findings." The silence in the hall was absolute as Miller stepped forward. Kay could sense the skepticism among the delegates. How could a member of a newly spacefaring species solve what had stumped the greatest minds of 12 advanced civilizations? "Thank you, Professor K," Miller began, his voice calm despite the pressure. "I want to start by acknowledging the brilliant work done by Loraxian mathematicians over centuries. Without your meticulous research and precision, I could never have recognized the pattern that led to this solution." It was a diplomatic opening, and Kay appreciated the human's tact. Miller activated the holographic display, showing the full complexity of the unified field equation as it had existed yesterday. "This equation represents one of the greatest mathematical achievements I've ever encountered. Its precision is remarkable." Then he began to manipulate the display just as he had done in the archives. But when approaching the problem of faster-than-light travel, absolute precision may not be necessary. What if, instead of accounting for every quantum fluctuation individually, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties? The equation transformed before their eyes, sections collapsing into simpler forms, variables combining or canceling entirely. Some delegates leaned forward in their seats, others whispered urgently to their colleagues. By recognizing that these fluctuations follow patterns at the macro level, we can simplify the approach dramatically. Miller continued, moving confidently through his explanation. "The result is a solution that requires vastly less energy to implement." He displayed the final calculations. The energy requirement reduced by a factor of 1 trillion, a practical, achievable level with current technology. "This isn't just a theoretical exercise," Miller concluded. "This makes faster-than-light travel possible now, not in some distant future." The hall erupted in sound. Exclamations of disbelief, urgent questions, excited discussions. Elder Vex raised all 4 hands, for silence which gradually returned. "These claims are extraordinary," said a vril delegate, rising from her seat. "Has this solution been verified?" "It has," Kay confirmed, stepping forward again. "I assembled a team of our leading mathematicians who worked through the night. We approached the problem from multiple angles and ran thousands of simulations. The results consistently support Captain Miller's solution." Another delegate, a floating spherical being from the Nexian system, moved forward. "How did a species with such limited mathematical development see what we all missed?" Miller smiled slightly. "With respect, it's precisely because of our limitations that we found this solution. On Earth, mathematicians don't have centuries to solve problems. Our lifespans are short, our resources limited. We're forced to look for patterns, for shortcuts." He gestured to the simplified equation. "This isn't about being smarter. It's about thinking differently. You sought perfect precision because you could afford to. We seek functional approximations because we must." Kay found himself nodding in agreement. There was profound wisdom in the human's words, a perspective he had never considered. "If I may," Kay addressed the assembly, "I believe what we're witnessing is not the superiority of human mathematics, but the value of diversity in scientific thought. Different evolutionary paths, different cultural approaches, different constraints, all leading to unique ways of seeing the same problem." The delegates considered this, many indicating agreement in their species-specific ways. Elder Vex spoke again. "If this solution proves practical, it will transform our understanding of space-time mechanics and revolutionize interstellar travel. The implications are profound for all our civilizations. Which brings us to an important question," said a tall, crystalline being from the outer systems. "Who will control this technology? The humans? The Loraxians? The Congress as a whole?" All eyes turned to Miller, who looked momentarily surprised by the question. "On Earth, we believe knowledge of this importance belongs to everyone. We didn't come here to claim ownership of an idea. We came to establish friendship and exchange knowledge." He looked at Kay. "I propose a joint development program, Loraxian precision combined with human intuition. Together we can turn this theoretical solution into practical technology faster than either of us could alone." Kay felt a profound sense of relief. The human wasn't trying to claim superiority or take control of the discovery. He was offering partnership. "I support this proposal," Kay said firmly, "and I volunteer to lead the Loraxian side of the collaboration." The months that followed transformed not just space travel, but the relationship between species across the known galaxy. The first prototype faster-than-light drive was built in a new joint facility established on Lorax's largest moon. Teams of Loraxian and human scientists worked side by side, each bringing their unique perspectives to the challenges of implementation. What had once seemed impossible, moving faster than light, became reality within a year. The maiden voyage of the test ship Unity, with Professor Kay and Captain Miller as co-commanders, traveled 10 light-years in under an hour, then safely returned. Kay found himself profoundly changed by the experience. His initial devastation, at having his life's work seemingly made irrelevant, had transformed into excitement about new possibilities. He and Miller had become not just colleagues but friends, each learning from the other's approach to science and to life. On the observation deck of the Unity after their successful test flight, Kay found Miller staring out at the stars. "What are you thinking, Jack?" Kay asked, using the human's first name as he had been invited to do. Miller smiled. "I'm thinking about an old saying from Earth. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Kay tilted his head, considering the metaphor. "An apt description of scientific progress." "Your work made my insight possible," Miller said. "Without the precision of your approach, I would have had nothing to simplify, no pattern to recognize." Kay's 4 eyes blinked in the pattern that humans had learned meant appreciation. "And without your fresh perspective, we might have spent another century adding complexity without seeing the underlying pattern." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars that were now truly within reach. The Council has approved expanding the joint program, Kay said eventually. Representatives from all 12 Congress species will be joining us along with more humans from Earth. They're calling it the Galactic Collaborative for Scientific Advancement. A new era of cooperation, Miller nodded, each species bringing its unique perspective to our shared challenges. Kay had lived 150 years, but he had never felt more excitement about the future than he did now. The universe had just become much smaller and infinitely more accessible. New civilizations would be discovered, new knowledge gained, new friendships formed, all because they had learned the most important equation of all, that different ways of thinking, when combined, could achieve what neither could accomplish alone. I have a proposal for our next project, Kay said, turning to his human friend. There's another equation we've struggled with for generations, a unified theory of consciousness. Perhaps it too could benefit from a fresh perspective. Miller grinned. I know just the human philosopher who might help us with that one. As the Unity made its way back to Lorax, carrying news that would change the course of galactic history, Kay reflected on how quickly his understanding of the universe had expanded, not through the addition of complexity, but through the elegant simplicity of a new perspective. Sometimes the most profound truths were not the most complicated, but the simplest. That was the axiom of simplicity, a principle that transcended species and would guide their shared future among the stars.